everyone, welcome back. Okay, so today I am going to be looking at comparatives and superlatives. So I decided to take a break from IELTS preparation and do something for my students who are just starting to learn. Okay, so when you're starting, how to use your comparatives and superlatives becomes an issue because you don't know when to say, oh, I'm smaller, or that's the smallest, and more, the most. This is an absolute horror, and I totally understand that. Okay, you don't have to worry. Why? Because I'm here to solve all your worries. So let's end that forever and go and have a look at our comparatives and superlatives. Okay, so here we are starting with our comparative adjectives. Okay, so why do we use our comparative adjectives? So they are always used when you are comparing two things. Okay, that's when you use your comparative adjectives. So how do you form them? Like it says over here, comparative adjectives are used to compare differences between the two objects they modify. They are used in sentences where two nouns are compared. So when you are comparing two things, we use our comparatives. Okay, so then you have your noun. Okay, then you have your verb, and then we use our comparative adjective, which is your larger here. So the adjective is large and comparative larger, and then you use your than, T-H-A-N, and then of course noun, which is the object. So my house is larger than hers. Okay, so two things are being compared here, my house and someone else's. Similarly, over here, this box is smaller than the one I lost. Again, two things are being compared. So the box which I have now and the one which I had but I lost. Okay, so always remember when you are using your comparative adjectives, you are comparing two things, just two things. Okay, now we come to superlative. And when do we use superlatives? So always remember, you use your superlative when you are comparing more than one thing. Okay, so two things, I'm sorry. So more than two things. So let's say here, if you says my house is larger than hers, so you are just comparing two with your comparative. But when you are going to compare your house with all the other houses in the locality, all right? So when you say my house is the largest one in our neighborhood, that means now you are comparing your house to all the other houses, not just one. Okay, so with comparative, we compare two things. With superlative, you are going to compare, it with all the other things. So in a group. So, okay, similarly over here, this is the smallest box I have ever seen. So in comparative, we were comparing two boxes, but here we are comparing this that, oh, this is the smallest box I have ever seen. So are you with me? You understand? So comparative, two things being compared, and superlative, you are comparing it to all the other things in the group. So let's say if I say Rose is taller than Rob, all right, so I'm talking about my class. Rose is a girl, she's taller than Rob. But if I say Rose is the tallest girl in the class, then I am comparing her to all the other students, okay? Moving on to the next one. Now we will look at how to form them, what happens, okay? So now, how do you form your comparative or superlative, okay? So adjectives with one syllable. I hope everybody understands what syllable are. So let's say clean, okay? So one syllable, clean, one, okay? So when you have your one syllable words, adjectives, you add ER to make the comparative form and add EST to make the superlative form. So if the adjective is clean, comparative becomes your cleaner and superlative form, the cleanest. Always remember, people, whenever you are using your superlative form, you always add the, okay? T-H-E, the. So clean, cleaner, the cleanest. Cold, colder, the coldest. Small, smaller, the smallest. Young, younger, the youngest, okay? So this is how you make your comparative and superlative with one syllable adjectives add ER to form your comparative, and add EST to make your superlative form. Okay? Is that all right? Everybody with me? Good. Now look over here. There are some spelling changes if there is one vowel followed by one consonant at the end of the adjective. So I hope you know what is your CVC rule. So consonant, vowel, consonant. So whenever we have such words which have consonant, vowel, consonant, the rule is, always remember, the rule is that you double the last consonant. Okay, so we often double the consonant. So the last, which is your consonant, you double it. So wet, wetter, the wettest. Okay, do not forget this rule. This is called as CVC rule, which I wrote here, consonant, vowel, consonant. So whenever you have such words, three-letter words, you double the last word. And big, bigger, the biggest. Okay, another one. In the adjective, if the adjective ends in Y. Okay, so if the adjective ends with Y, this often changes to I. So dry is the adjective. So then you remove your Y and then you add I-E-R. Okay, do not forget if the adjective ends with a Y, we remove our Y, and what do? We add I, and then we add ER, and similarly EST. Okay, you remember this? When the adjective ends with Y, what do? We remove our Y, we put I, and then we add ER and EST. So dry becomes your drier, and superlative becomes your driest. Okay, so dry becomes drier and then driest. Happy? Happier? The happiest. Okay, very good. Now looking at this one, if the adjective ends in E, we don't add another E, just R. Okay, so if there is an adjective and at the end you have E, so you do not double that, you just add your R and ST. So nice, nicer, large, larger, and largest. Is that okay, everybody? So what did we learn here? We learned that one syllable adjectives, we add ER to make our comparative, and we add EST to make our superlative form. And if you have a CVC rule, which is your consonant, vowel, consonant, you add the last consonant, you double it, okay? And then you add your ER. If an adjective ends with a Y, what do? We remove Y and we add I, and then we add our ER and EST. Similarly, if it has E at the end, we do not double it, we just add our R and ST, okay? Moving on to next slide. All right. So there are a few adjectives that we have to use more or most with, even though they only have one syllable. All right. So sometimes there are certain, adjectives which are one syllable, but we can't add ER. We add more to make them into comparative, and we add most to add them, to make superlative. Like this one over here, fun. We say more fun and most fun, and not funner and funnest. There's no such thing, all right? And you just need to remember that. Real becomes more real, most real, and not realer or the realest. Again, not a possibility, okay? So you have to remember that. Wrong, more wrong, and the most wrong. Not wronger or wrongest. Similarly, right, more right, the most right, but not righter or the rightest. So fun, real, wrong, right. You don't add ER or EST, even though they are one syllable. Okay? All right. Moving on. Now we are talking about two syllables. Okay? So we looked at one syllable where we add ER and EST, and now we're looking at two syllable adjectives. So for adjectives with two syllables, we generally use more or the most. So careful, which has two, careful, two syllables, okay? Careful. This is how I teach in my class, okay? So how many syllables you have, you clap. So careful becomes more careful and the most careful. Bored, two syllables, so more bored or most bored, okay? So this is how you make them. Again, there is but Some two-syllable adjectives can take ER or EST. It is also fine to use more or the most. But there are certain which can take both the forms. So you can say cleverer or more clever, or the cleverest or the most clever. All right. So they can take both the forms. Simple, simpler, the simplest. Narrow, narrower, the narrowest. Okay. So this you will remember with practice. But for now, you can remember that whenever you have your two syllables, you add more and the most. Remember, I said whenever you are making your superlative, we need to add the THE. Do not forget that. Okay. And now again, the same thing, adjectives with two syllables that end in Y usually add ER or EST. Generally, Y changes to I. It is also fine to use more or most. So dirty becomes your dirtier or the dirtiest. Pretty becomes your prettier or the prettiest. And happy becomes your happier or the happiest. So always remember when you have Y at the end, remove your Y and add your I and then your ER and EST. Or you can also use your more and the most. Okay, because they are two syllables. So either way you can use it. All right, with me? Moving on. Now, when you have adjectives with more than two syllables, what do we use? Adjectives with more than two syllables can only make their comparatives by using more and their superlative by using the most. All right, so with two syllables, you can sometimes, you can use both ER and EST or more and the most. But when you have more than two syllables, that is not an option. So we only make our comparative by using more and we make our superlative by using the most. Beautiful. Three syllables. Beautiful. Intelligent. Okay. So three syllables when you have, actually in four. Okay. So when you have two syllables, more than two syllables, so then what do? We use our more for our comparative. So beautiful because she's more beautiful and she is the most beautiful girl in the town. Okay, so like I said, superlative we use when you are comparing it to all the other things in the group, and more you use when you're comparing between two things. So Rose is more beautiful than Daisy, or Rose is the most beautiful flower. Then you have your intelligent, which becomes more intelligent, and the most intelligent person. Okay, interesting, more interesting, or the most interesting. Expensive, more expensive, or the most expensive. So what did we learn? We learned that when you have more than two syllables, there is not an option. We have to make our comparative by using more and our superlative by using the most. Do not forget that I'm always repeating that whenever we are making our superlative, you add the, okay, so the most. All right. Now we have some irregular adjectives. I know they are so much trouble, they're just pain. But that's what English is all about. So this, guys, you just have to remember, all right? So these are your irregular adjectives. So they don't follow that rule of adding, ER or EST. You just have to remember them. So like here, good, better, best. Bad, worse, worst. Far, further, furthest. Little, less, least. Much, more, the most. Okay, so good, better, the best. Bad, worse, the worst. Far, further, the furthest. Little, less, the least. Much, more, the most. Okay, is that all right? So these are your irregular adjectives, which you just have to remember. But with your one syllable, we add ER and EST to make them into ER for your comparative, EST to make them into superlative form. With two syllables, we can add ER and we can also add EST, and we can also use more and the most. But whenever you have more than two syllables, you can only make your comparatives by using more. And when you have to make your superlative, you have to use the most. Okay, so like we just looked at, beautiful, Rose is more beautiful than Daisy, and Rose is the most beautiful flower. Okay, so when you are using your comparative, you compare two things. When you're using your superlative, that means you're comparing it to all the other things in the group. All right, so that brings us to the end of this video, which was the longest so far. Longest, okay? So remember your superlatives and your comparatives, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Until we meet next time, happy learning!